All right, wonderful. Welcome back to Beit Am and our Adult Ed series, Making Sense of the Siddur. I'm Rabbi Philip Ressler. It's good to see everyone after the 2-week break. You have a couple of things in front of you, whether you're here live with me in the library or if you're following along at home, a source sheet, and also for folks here, a chart that I've printed up for you, a blank chart to fill in, because what we're going to, just like what I have on the board, because as I think I teased last week, that's how we're going to kind of construct Mariv and Mincha services by showing how they're the same and different from the Shaharit base that we know. If you're following along at home, you can print an already filled in copy of that charts from the notes just below the video. We're using the Siddurim, Siddur Sim Shalom. It's the Siddur of the conservative movement. One of the Siddurim we use here at Beit Am. That's just for reference. There are also a couple of links in the description to Mincha and Mariv services as they appear on Svaria.org, and also the source sheet as well, which we have in front of us. But before we jump into Mincha and Mariv today, there's been something I've been wanting to talk about that's a little bit of a tangent. But I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago that kind of the further we get from the core, the further we get from like those original pieces of liturgy, the Amidah and Shema, the more things start to diverge according to which tradition you're following. We see this all over the place in Judaism, different communities, especially in an era before real reliable communication between communities, maintain similarity in their traditions, but start to diverge in some ways. We see this in dialects of Hebrew. We see this in dialects of Aramaic. Different communities make different rulings on halakha. There's, a great example is eating kitniot on Passover. Those are things that are not themselves chametz, but resemble chametz enough that Ashkenazi Jews avoid them, Sephardi Jews don't. It's still kosher for Pesach, according to both, but they have different customs. So another way that different ethnic communities of Jews have diverged is according to their prayer rites. Moshe, could you do me a favor? The switch on the right back there has these more overhead lights. I can tell from my video them a little bit poorly lit. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Nope. Perfect. Okay. So there are different prayer rites, and RITE is the version of rite that I'm using. The matbeya that we're learning, that is the formula of prayer that we're learning here, is the one that we use at Beit Am. It's the one that I learned growing up, and it's the one that's used in the vast majority of North American synagogues. It is, however, not the only Jewish matbeya. I want to name and acknowledge that Ashkenazi normativity is real and sometimes problematic. There's a certain othering of other rites and traditions of Jewish communities from outside of Europe that sometimes makes them seem strange, foreign, like somehow other to what Jews ought to be doing. That's, of course, we understand that not to be the case, but nonetheless it happens. And as I said, the more we move away from the kind of core pieces, the more that what we learn here applies specifically to the matbeya that we're learning and may be different elsewhere. Okay, so a brief explanation of different nusachot, different formulas of prayer. There's nusach Ashkenaz. So Ashkenaz is generally speaking Central and Eastern Europe. Jews who come from there are Ashkenazi Jews or Ashkenazim. Minhag Ashkenaz, literally the Ashkenaz custom, is the one that comes from Germany, kind of the western part of Ashkenaz. The other sort of subset of Nusach Ashkenaz is called Minhag Polin, as in Poland, because it comes from Poland and Lithuania, and that's actually the one that we use here in the U.S. Oddly enough, right? That I guess the community of Jews that came here, and I'm not a scholar of this history enough to tell you why this is the case, but we use Minhag Polin, which is a subdivision of Nusach Ashkenaz. There are several others, though, that you may encounter in various communities. What's called Nusach Edot HaMizrach, literally the tradition of the Eastern communities. So that's what we would think of as Sephardi Jews. So from Spain and North Africa, use Nusach Edot HaMizrach. And there are many, many, many different varieties, much more than the sort of two main ones there are for Ashkenaz. From Yemen, all over the Arabian Peninsula, Spain and North Africa, they all have, it's much more variegated, basically, the Nusach Edot HaMizrach. And you'll see much more of this, like I said, it's not very common in America. Ashkenazi traditions are very dominant here. The opposite is true in Israel. You'll see a lot of different Mizrahi traditions at various places you might pray around Israel. To really confuse you, there's another Nusach called Nusach Sfard, which is not Sephardi, okay? So the Sephardim use Nusach Edot HaMizrach, the Eastern tradition. Nusach Sfard was an attempt at reconciling Ashkenazi customs with the Kabbalistic customs of Rabbi Isaac Luria. So Isaac Luria was a Kabbalist. He used a Sephardi tradition. His community was in Sfat in Israel. A lot of the disciples who became Hasidim adopted Lurianic Kabbalah, but they came from Ashkenaz. So basically, they had these Ashkenazi, prayer rites that they knew, but they wanted to incorporate Lurianic Kabbalah. And Luria himself was a Sephardi Jew and used these Sephardi rites. So the Hasidic movement created what they called Nusach Sfard to try to harmonize the two. And it's basically used only by Hasidic communities, and there are many, many different sub-varieties as well. So if you're going to buy your own Siddur, what you want to look for is Nusach Ashkenaz. If you buy one that belongs to a movement like this, you're going to get Nusach Ashkenaz because that's the only one they're going to use. But if you were to buy, for example, that Koren Orthodox movement Siddur that I had previously, they publish a Nusach Ashkenaz. They also publish Nusach Sfard. They may well publish Edot HaMizrach. I don't know. But Sfard doesn't necessarily mean Sephardi, is the point. Just to confuse you. And we are not going to go into differences between those Nusachot because that's just not relevant to what we're talking about. Okay. But that is how we're going to transition into our main topic, because just as learning the standard matbea of weekday Shaharit is going to help us appreciate what makes other services and holidays different. Same is true if you go to a congregation that davens in Nusach Sfard, you'll appreciate. You'll be a little bit lost periodically, but you also appreciate what they're doing differently because you'll know Nusach Ashkenaz. Make sense? Okay. Questions about other Nusachots without going too deep? Okay. The Wikipedia articles on this are actually fantastic, so I recommend those. Okay. So let's talk, before we jump into chart making, about the difference in mood in between morning prayer and afternoon and evening prayer. So this is a little bit hard to conceptualize because we live in a world with electricity, and electric lights, street lights lighting our paths, wherever we're going, indoor lighting that makes, there's no difference in terms of what we do in this room from nighttime hours, from daytime hours. We have electric lights, right? But there's a certain fear of darkness that's imprinted on our animal brains. Right, it comes from way back when, eons ago, when humanity first came down from the trees, and suddenly they were vulnerable to the large nighttime predators that were on the ground. Right, so it was a survival instinct initially, but that's been really deeply embedded in our brains at this point, such that the metaphor of light is good and dark is bad is like really deeply embedded in our consciousness and our understanding of the world. Even though we've since invented electric lights, and we're probably not as scared of the darkness as we were as our ancestors were, our liturgy took shape back when night was only lit by the stars, and if you were lucky, maybe a flickering torch. So nighttime harbors, in the liturgy's conception, harbors danger, and in that sense, it reminds us of our mortality. in a way that daytime prayer doesn't, because there is real risk of death or danger or who knows what. So the Ma'ariv, the evening liturgy, reflects fear of what nighttime might bring. So in that way, it includes affirmations that are designed to help us sort of bolster our morale and leave us feeling as safe and as confident as we can going into the nighttime. So there's affirmations of God's mercy, God's protection, petitions for divine protection. And if Ma'ariv is the beginning of nighttime, it's when things are getting dark. Mincha, the afternoon service, corresponds to kind of the end of the day. If Shaharit is the beginning of day, Mincha is the end. And they're actually frequently in communities that daven all the services, said back to back. So you might come to synagogue in the morning before work to daven Shaharit, go to work, go about your day, come to synagogue afterwards to daven both Mincha straight into Ma'ariv back to back. And the advantage there is pretty obvious. You only have to get 2 minions together, right, instead of 3, right? So already that's economized in that way. So Mincha, because it's an afternoon service and still takes place at the end of our workday, is dominated by a sense of urgency. That the day is growing short, as opposed to Shaharit when everything sort of stretches out before us. At Mincha, twilight, it's not twilight yet, but the daylight hours are starting to wane. We may still have a lot left to do before the end of the day, before we're prepared for the nighttime. So in terms of the moods of Mincha and Ma'ariv, I think that's kind of how you could characterize it. Mincha is a bit more urgent and therefore a bit more brief. Ma'ariv as well, there's some amount of brevity because it reflects a sense of danger and that we don't want to be too distracted for too long. We have preparations to make before the nighttime, and also to get us in the right frame of mind to make it through the nights. Okay, so we've already graphed, as it were, the flow of the Shaharit service. I thought about leaving up the sort of mountain model. I'm gesturing in my board in the mirror, but the sort of slope up from Birkot HaShachar at the beginning, all the way peaking at the Torah service and coming down a little bit into the concluding prayers. We sort of graphed that flow of the Shaharit service up to a high point and down to a close. And I think it's possible to understand that model is in some ways certainly is the standard model, perhaps the ideal model as well. I think that's a bit of a separate discussion, but it's possible to then construct what we'd expect to find in Mincha Ma'ariv based on that Shaharit prototype. So we know it's going to be a similar ramp up and kind of cool down model. And going through these 7 elements, which I've arranged vertically here, labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can kind of try to extrapolate what we'd expect. So we're going to do that a little bit interactively. You got your charts right in front of you. You're welcome to follow along and fill them in as with whatever notes. I try to leave you as much room on those charts as you can to make notes, but I'll also fill them in up here. And we'll start actually in the middle with the core rubrics. So based on what we know already about Shema and its blessings, unit number 3 here, Shema and its blessings. What would we expect? Would we expect Shema and its blessings to appear in Mincha in the afternoon, or in Ma'ariv, or both? What do you think? Yeah, Stephanie, what do you think? Why both?
Well, Shema and the Amidah are the heart of the service.
Good.
And therefore, if you've got other services, you've still got to have the heart there.
Absolutely. You're wrong, but I'm really glad you said that. You're really productively wrong. Because you would really think that, yeah, we have Shema and its blessings in all 3. It is in some ways that, as close to a Jewish creed as we have. It is a core element. Why wouldn't we expect the core to be there, right? However, in the text of the Shema itself, which I provided on the source sheet here, you can, of course, find it in any Siddur as well. The text of the first paragraph of Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9. This part, you know, hear, O Israel, Lord is our God, etc., etc., etc. You should love the Lord with all your mights. And then there in verse 7, impress them upon your children, recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Right? So right there in the Shema's own instructions for when we're supposed to say it, it's 2 times a day, right? When you lie down, obviously in the evening, and when you rise up, obviously in the morning as well, right? So I'm going to elaborate a little bit later on in terms of what we actually find with Shema. What we'll say for the sake of the matter right now, oops, I'm sorry. We want we'll say included in, I'm sorry. I had it right, I was just in the wrong place. So we don't find it in Mincha, that's right, but we do in Mari. Okay. Good. So there's a little bit of variation. I'll spoil it a little bit and tell you there's some variation in between the morning Shema and its blessings and the evening one, but we'll circle back to that later on. Let's think about our other core rubric, the Amidah. Based on what we know already about the basis for the Amidah and its purpose, what would you expect? Included in weekday Mincha, included in Mariv, one, the other, both. What do you think?
Well, I'm with her. I think it ought to be in both.
Okay. Say why.
Because it's so important.
Okay, good. Certainly.
I mean, the foundation, everything else sort of goes from that.
Good. So do you remember what we talked about then, and this is all the way back, I think, in week 2, about the basis for why we daven Amidah? Because remember, another name for Amidah is Hatfilah, the prayer. Originally, this was the core, right? Do you remember there were 2 different bases that we used as sort of the warrant to say we have to daven Amidah? Do you remember one or the other of them?
The petitioning.
Yeah, that is what Amidah is. It's about petitioning, but there was a source of, there's a basis, there's an origin for the Amidah. And there were sort of 2 different stories told about where it came from. Okay, that's great. I'm glad I get to tell you. Okay, story number 1 is, and they're actually both reflected in the Talmud. Story number 1 is that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instituted the 3 times daily Amidah. Okay, so I'm not going to read this whole long paragraph inside, but this is from, on your source sheets, it's source number 2. It's from the Talmud Tractate Brachot, page 26b. It was stated by Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Tanina. He said, the practice of praying 3 times a day daily is ancient, although not in its present form. Prayers were instituted by the patriarchs. However, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said prayers were instituted based on the daily offerings, sacrificed in the temple. Prayers parallel the offerings in terms of both time and characteristics. So it goes on to tell you exactly how they figure that. Abraham instituted Shaharit, Isaac instituted Mincha, Jacob instituted Ma'ariv. And they also learn it according to Rabbi Yehoshua's opinion, that prayers are based on the laws of the daily offerings. How do they get that? Well, because it has to do with the time. There were certain timetables on which the sacrifices were offered in the temple. So for the morning sacrifice, they did that up until noon. So therefore, we can do our weekday Shaharit up until noon. And there are other opinions to that out of some of the back and forth out of here, so it would read a little more clearly. The rabbis said the afternoon prayer can be recited until the evening because there was a second daily offering in the temple that was sacrificed until evening. And importantly as well, we read all the way at the end of that source Why did they say that the evening prayer is not fixed? Because the burning of the limbs and the fats of the offering were not consumed by the fire on the altar until the evening. They remained there on the altar and were offered continuously throughout the entire night. Okay. So there are two bases for instituting the practice of Amidah. Both the idea that the patriarch started it, which is clearly legendary, but also powerfully compelling from a Jewish religious standpoint, and also basically pantomiming the sacrifices as well. Okay, so if we went only according to the patriarch's explanation, do you think we have all three, or just some combination of them, morning, afternoon, night? I'm going to tell you all three. Right, good, because three patriarchs, 3 times a service, they all prayed. There doesn't seem to be any difference, right? So if we only had the one explanation, only the one basis, the patriarchs, we'd expect all three. If we went by the sacrifices, and I'm going to align a little bit here about what actually went on in the temple as far as we understand it, that the tamid, the regular offering that went on each daily, was done in the morning, and it was done in the afternoon. But there wasn't actually a sacrifice offered at night. We don't know exactly why, but maybe it was just too dark out. There wasn't actually an evening sacrifice. So what they did do, though, was burn all the leftover fat and the limbs and things like that that had accumulated on the altar for the daily sacrifices. They kept that. There was a night shift that kept that burning because you couldn't just toss it. It was holy sacrifice stuff. So they kept the fire going overnight because this stuff takes a long time to burn up. They'd keep the fire burning overnight so that the altar would be clear in the morning. They'd scrape away all the ashes from the previous night and start up again first thing in the morning. Make sense? Okay. So if that's the case, 2, 3, 2 maybe, right? It's not clear. 2 definitely morning and afternoon. And 3 is a maybe, right? Okay. So the Talmud's discussion, and this takes place in a separate part about whether we daven Amidah 3 times a day, is actually around the idea of whether the Ma'ariv Amidah is what they call reshut, optional, or chova, obligatory. If it's optional, how optional is it? And if it's obligatory, where does that obligation come from? That's the Talmud's discussion. The patriarchal basis points towards chova, that it's obligatory. Jacob davened in the evening, so we do too. But the burning of the fat of the limb wasn't a sacrifice. It wasn't an avodah in the same way that these two were. It was just basically cleanup duty from sacrifices that had already been had, right? Long story short, the halakha ends up becoming Ma'ariv Amidah is intrinsically optional, but praying Ma'ariv implies that you've accepted upon yourself the obligation to say Ma'ariv. So you don't have to do it, but once you've done it, it's as if you were obligated, is how they make it work. And moreover, because all Israel has already accepted the tradition to daven Ma'ariv, we've accepted upon ourselves Ma'ariv Amidah as obligatory. So even though it may, from our basis in sacrifice, it may not necessarily be obligatory, because we are Jews and we accept the customs of Israel. It's as if everybody has accepted it. It's now obligatory by community practice, basically. Okay. At the same time, some of that reshut optionality remains. So whereas in the morning and afternoon, we do the repetition. Everyone davens their Amidah silently, and then there's a repetition by the prayer leader out loud. We do that in the morning, the evening, or morning, the afternoon, but not in the evening. There's only a silent repetition. And the reason is because the reason for the repetition is to fulfill everyone's obligation. If for some reason, I didn't daven correctly on my private one, the prayer leader doing it on behalf of everyone fulfills my obligation. Since I'm not obligated, there's nothing for the prayer leader to fulfill for me, he or she would be doing blessings in vain. Does that kind of make sense? I'm not obligated. I'm kind of obligated, but I'm not officially. So there's no reason for the prayer leader to say anything on my behalf.
Now, what happens, for instance, I'm familiar with someone who does prayers, so I'm assuming it's sort of mincha, but as a single person, then they can't say the Amidah, right?
No, absolutely can.
I thought it had to be in a...
There are certain units of liturgy that require a minyan. Kaddish, Baruchu, are main ones. Reading the Torah requires a minyan. Amidah can be said privately if you're just davening along. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
You can't do the repetition without a minyan, but you can do individual private. So if we were all davening, the handful of us were davening Shaharit together, we would all do our private Amidah, but there would be no leader's repetition. I might lead us through the rest of everything else, but we would just not do that. We would finish and then we'd go on to the next step.
Oh, okay.
Which, we do our tafanu, our silent prayer, we'd skip Torah reading, we'd end up going to it would basically be over that. That kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 Amidahs a day, no repetition in Ma'ariv. Is that fair? Okay. We've covered 3 and 4 in terms of core rubrics. And I'm going to go ahead and touch briefly on the other one that I think you would consider core to the morning service, which is the Torah reading. What do you think? We haven't covered Torah reading specifically. That's actually next week's class. I think you can sort of go by feel on this one.
I wouldn't think.
You wouldn't think so. You have any ideas for why? Any support for that?
Well, it wouldn't seem like you would repeat whatever had been the Torah portion in the morning.
Good. So that's a good question, or a good reason not to, right? Mm-hmm. What is it? What would you read? Right? Maybe a different part of the portion. Yeah, you would maybe read something else. Good question. So maybe it wouldn't make sense to repeat what you did. Okay, good. In general, and we haven't talked about this yet, so I don't expect you to know, Torah reading doesn't happen in every Shaharit service, just Mondays and Thursdays during the week. So it's already sort of relatively rare anyway. Remember the mood of these 2 services? This one's all about urgency. Like Torah reading is something that takes a long time. You got to take the Torah out. It's not exactly the kind of thing that most, that you're necessarily prepared to stop in the middle of a busy workday to do. And Ma'ariv happens close to dark. And reading in the dark is hard, especially by torchlight. So that one makes sense too. So yes, generally speaking, no weekdays, no Torah reading, Mincha or Ma'ariv. Tov. Questions so far? Awesome. Continuing with our other more peripheral rubrics. Oh, yes?
Well, okay, you're going to take up Torah reading next week anyway. I was just curious, if it's read on Monday and Thursday, are the same parts read?
Yes.
Okay. And then it's on Shabbat too, isn't it?
Yep. But that is a more, we'll talk a bit about this. The Shabbat reading is longer.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more of the portion. If here we do what's called the triennial reading, which is a third of the parsha at a time. This year we're on the first third. Next year we'll do the second third of every parsha. Following year we're the third of every parsha. So every 3 years we'll complete the entire thing, basically.
Okay.
If you were doing what they call a full full reading, you would read the entire portion on Shabbat. You would read a snippet from the very beginning during the week leading up to that. 3 aliyot instead of 7. So we'll go into more detail about that. Yeah. Good. Okay, so moving on to our more kind of peripheral rubrics. Number 1 we can knock out pretty easily. Birkot HaShachar at Mincha or Ma'ariv, yay or nay? What do we think? how do we translate Birkot HaShachar? What kind of blessings
That's
are they?
Prayers
Morning
of
blessing.
morning.
Yeah,
Getting up.
we call them the morning blessings. Do you say morning blessings in the afternoon?
No.
Do you say morning blessings at night? No, you don't. Yeah, they're designed specifically, and remember their context too. They're designed specifically as blessings to be said right upon waking. They wouldn't make any sense at that point of the service, right? Okay. Psuke de Zimra is a little bit more interesting, right? Psuke de Zimra, verses of song, as we call them. It's that big compilation of songs and other biblical texts. Recalling what we learned 2 weeks ago, a little bit. What can you remember about the purpose, the sort of function of Psuke de Zimra?
You're starting to set the mood.
Good, set the mood. Mm-hmm. What else?
Well, focus your thoughts, etc., for the day, for
prayer.
the service.
Yeah, right.
For prayer.
Good. Mm-hmm.
So you would want to include that in all.
Do you remember the word we used to talk about focus in prayer?
No.
Andrew is still in your glory. Yes, kavanah. Very good.
Okay.
Very good. Kavanah. Yeah, we focus our kavanah. Good. Anything else in terms of I think that pretty well covers it. Like you think about it, remembering our sort of roadmap. It's on the upslope, right? So they play a vital function. You know, they're focusing our kavanah, like exactly like you said, as if you were reading out of my notes. Focus our kavanah. It helps us become a prayer community together. There's because they're sung. It's participatory. It's communal. It's designed to bring us together. They have an important role to play. Remember how long Psuke de Zimra is in the morning? It's quite long. If you just, for reference, in your Siddur, it starts on page 54. The weekday Shaharit starts on page 54 and goes all the way till page 96. Yeah. And some of that, I think there's a little bit of the Shabbat stuff that they included. Yeah, there's a few pages that are Shabbat stuff. But still, it's a lot of Psalms. Do you think that reflects the mood of Mincha or Margaret? A big, expansive opportunity to focus our...
No, I don't think so.
Right, so it seems a little bit at odds with the mood, but it also performs an important function. So what might you expect we would get in terms of Psuke de Zimra and Mincha and Margaret? Andrew.
Short mood, but still something to set intention and focus.
Beautiful, and that is exactly what you find. Wouldn't you know it? So, we'd expect some sort of songs, right? For Mincha, possibly also Ma'ariv, especially when they're not recited back to back. You could potentially see if you're planning to do these back to back, doing some Psuke for Mincha and an extremely abbreviated one for Ma'ariv, entirely possible. There's also another principle at work here that's worth touching on called tircha de tzibura. A tircha is a burden. It's something onerous. It's really a hassle, and the tzibur is the community. So things that are a burden for the community are frowned on in halakha, even if they would be sort of called for by our religious reasoning. If it's too much trouble, the community's not going to do it, so there's no point in legislating it. Is basically the idea. If we ask people to do impossible things, they're going to give up and quit, and then the whole system is going to fall apart. You're going to undermine everything else you want people to do. So you don't ask people to do impossible things. It's tough to take time off from work to pray, right? So we want to make this kind of as smooth as possible. And at night you're tired. You've probably been working hard all day and ready to go to bed. So brevity is a concern for both of these. So for Mincha, we do include some psalms, but only one. Only what we call Ashrei, which is that elaborated version of Psalm 145. That little trident logo is how you indicate psalms. It's that elaborated version of Psalm 145. It's got a couple of verses tacked on at the beginning of it. The part we know is Ashrei Yeshvei V'Techa V'Yichalu Chasola. The rabbis loved Ashrei for some reason, so it appeared multiple times in Shaharit, and it constitutes basically all of Sukkot Zimra for Mincha. The Ma'ariv warm-up is even shorter, but it's also included. It's just 2 lines from the Psalms. Let's see, 78, 38, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what these are, and 2010. If you want to check it out in your Siddur, turn to page 200. If you check it out in your Siddur on page 200, you get these 2 lines from the Psalms, which read, Vehu Rachum Yechaper Avon V'lo Yashchitz. So God, being merciful, grants atonement for sin and does not destroy. V'hirba lahashiva po, V'lo ya'ir kol chamato. Time and again, God restrains wrath and refuses to let rage be all-consuming. Adonai Hoshia, God save us. Hamelech Yanenu V'yom Korenu. Answer us, O King, when we call. So remembering what we talked about in terms of the theme of Ma'ariv, these reflect some real Ma'ariv specific concerns, right? They both evoke, their petitions. Save us is literally a petition for God's compassion, but it also just recalls God's mercy, God's granting of atonement for sin, not destroying, restraining wrath. These are verses that very succinctly summarize what we're here to do. We're here to pray for our safety through the night. We're here to evoke God's attribute of mercy. And even though it doesn't tell you exactly which lines from Psalms they are in this book, they are 2 lines from the Psalms, and so they fulfill the function of Sukkot Zimra. It's extremely short. I think did I write it in here? I didn't. They are not in this book, I don't think. No. There are some Siddurim you'll find that have 2 other little elements just before Ma'ariv. I think Psalm 134. I think there may be one which is actually the Psalm 130. It's actually the shortest psalm in all of the Psalms. Is also you'll see appear before Ma'ariv as well. But you got it exactly right. Very abbreviated Sukkot Zimra for both Mincha and Ma'ariv. Questions about that? Awesome. Okay. We've almost filled out our whole chart already. Unit number 5, which I've been labeling silent prayer mostly just to avoid confusion. I'm going to introduce the term by which it's called, which is tachanun. I'm not going to dwell too long on tachanun, but it's this long rambling discourse that developed out of the idea that there's the idea of confession that completes the silent recitation of the Amidah. You remember we talked about the need for both keva and kavanah, so there's sort of defined words to say, and also the idea that you should introduce your own prayers from your hearts when you have that moment standing before God in the Amidah. So Tachanun started out as an opportunity to freely confess. Over time, like all of this, there was a standardized text that was written down and became standard. There are 2 Tachanuns. I mean, there are 2 Tachanuns, basically a long one and a short one. And the long one includes the short one. If you check it out in the Siddur, just to get an idea of what we're talking about, turn back just a couple of pages to 192. Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, first let's check out 192. You see it starts with Tachanun on 192 and goes for about a page and a half, right? And then before we get to Kaddish Shalom, which as we know is part of the concluding prayer section, you get about a page and a half of Tachanun. That's the short one. If you turn back to 128, This is back in Shaharit. And this is the Tachanun of Shaharit, and it's the long Tachanun. You do it on Monday and Thursday, on Torah reading days, basically. You do the whole thing, and you can see how long it is. Start turning pages. There's paragraphs labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Aleph, Bet, all the way to 136. So it's quite long. It does have you, let's see. There's a shortened version. Yes. On days that are not Monday and Thursday, you do the short one. So you begin with Vayamar David on 132. That's the long story short on Tachanun. We're not going to go too deep on its meaning. Just know that it's basically a confession of sin, but it's been standardized at this point. What would you expect in terms of presence of Tachanun in Mincha and Ma'ariv? Would you ever do the long one?
No.
Definitely not. It is included in Mincha, but only the short one. And it is left out of Ma'ariv. I think the idea here is we're trying to build everyone up. We're trying to build everyone up in the evening, not take everyone down too far. Tachanun is all about kind of humbling yourself and really going down. So, yes, to avoid tircha de tzibora, to avoid too much burden for the community, short Tachanun Mincha and none at Ma'ariv. I don't have much more to say about that.
Now,
Yeah.
it seems to me I remember you saying that frequently in a Shabbat service they're skipping the Tachanun.
Tachanun? Yeah, there's a Tachanun on Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
But we'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, next week.
Okay.
Shabbat specifically.
So it's just, in terms of services, then it's just.
Weekdays only,
Weekday.
long one Monday and Thursday, short one all the other days except Shabbat, and short one in every minute. Shabbat. That's all there is today. Okay. We're down to our last one. Concluding prayers. What do you think? Concluding prayers. Do we remember what's included in concluding prayers? There are two main elements. Aleinu, mourner's Kaddish. Usually two Kaddishes, a Kaddish Shalem, and then Aleinu, and then Kaddish Yatom, a mourner's Kaddish, right? There was a bit of extra stuff before that often gets skipped. I talked about Kedusha de Sidra. It's recalling Kedusha from back earlier in our Ramadan. It's brought up here, but in Aramaic. Ashrei comes again. If you want to check it out where it's at in your Siddurim on 152. This is the concluding prayers of Shaharit. So you got Ashrei. Oh, Psalm 20, I forgot Psalm 20. Kedusha de Sidra, Shalem, Aleinu, and mourner's Kaddish. Okay. Based on what we've established so far and what you know about the moons of Mincha and Ma'ariv, what do you think? Concluding prayers, do they transfer over or not? Take a shot.
I think not in the afternoon because it's so often kind of piggybacks on Ma'ariv.
Mm-hmm.
And also you're not really concluding because you're still going through maybe your day. And I think maybe you conclude on Ma'ariv because it's the end of the day.
That's a really good thought. And I think especially if you're doing these back to back, maybe you wouldn't do concluding prayers here. That's very clever. Again, productively wrong. That's great. It's good.
Well, you've got to have
wrong.
some kind of conclusion to this, closing to the service.
Yes.
No matter where it is.
Yes, I think you're right. So ultimately, what we find is that we get concluding prayers in both Mincha and Ma'ariv, but shorter ones. We get just what I sort of described as the core of Kaddish Shalem, Aleinu, and Mortar's Kaddish, right? We don't do Kedusha de Sidra, we don't do Ashrei, we don't sort of embellish or dawdle or linger too long. We get just that core. I could definitely see the logic of not concluding here if you're just going to go into it again. However, remember the function of Kaddishes is frequently as that kind of punctuation mark. So it actually kind of makes sense to have a punctuation mark in between the two. And one tradition you'll find too, because if you really did them one straight into another, you would almost not be able to tell them apart, because as much as we call Kaddishes punctuation marks, we just go on after that too. Frequently, you'll if you're gathering with a community to do the Mincha Ma'ariv back-to-back thing, you'll get a quick little Devar Torah right in between the two, so that there's a break made in between the two. That was my responsibility frequently as a rabbinic student, was to come up with 2 minutes of Torah, a quick little something to share in between these two, so we could dive it and get on with our evenings. Good. And yeah, I don't have to prove to you in the Siddur that there's material missing. You can look that up if you like. Okay. Questions so far? So let's take a look back over what we got.
So when
Yep.
put down what you said that is included in.
We'll do Kedusha. Aleinu. Mortar's Kaddish. The same is true here. Those three. I suppose there's just stuff left out. That's all stuff that appears in Shaharit. We just leave out Kedusha de Sidra mostly. Got it? Okay. So let's take a look through what we got. Do we actually see the pattern that we talked about as sort of the ideal standard pattern of an ascent up and then a descent? Coming into Ma'ariv, we've been working all day. We've put down our farm implements, gathered together quickly in the synagogue. We right with Psuke, Ashrei, Psalm 145, to get us focusing on Kavanah. Skipping over Shema and its blessings right to the climax of Amidah. Quick Tachanun, so that we don't tarry too long, and a quick conclusion, Kedusha and Aleinu Mortar's Kaddish. It's a short arc instead of being this long, sweeping arc. It's a short arc. It's designed for brevity, but there still is an up and there still is a down. Weekday Ma'ariv. Let's say we've now finished our work. We're not davening back to back, but we've regathered at home, regathered at the synagogue for Ma'ariv. But the night is closing in quickly. It's just gotten dark. We've seen a handful of stars in the sky. So our slope up is in some ways shorter. It's only 2 lines from Psalms, but also Shema and its blessings show up here, which, as we saw in the slope, is still a ramp up. It still deliberately, leads into Amidah. It's got that focus from the universal towards the personal. We'll go over more in detail what happens there in just a moment. But we get that slow ramp up to the Amidah again as the peak. Now you can see Amidah rather than Torah really is the peak experience of both these other services. And then again, a cool down period with the concluding prayers. So that way we sort of preserve the same arc, just in a little bit of a different shape, a shorter radius arc, right?
I have a question. When would a man have time to work?
In between all the davening and studying that he's doing?
I mean, the morning service goes from what, 9:30 in the morning until about 12:30?
Frequently, with the Torah reading and all that. That's Shabbat, remember?
Okay.
So there is no work to get to on Shabbat. So that one is as we'll see next week. Really stuffed full of all sorts of other embellishments and and things like that.
Okay, so a shocker.
Weekday Shaharit, yep. Still has Torah reading, but remember it's only 3 aliyot instead of 7. So it is it is shorter.
So it's maybe 2
Sugi de
hours.
Zimra is also shorter. We'll see that as well. It's still, it's not nothing, but it's much easier to do. Remember, they're getting up dawn. It's easier to get in before starting your workday. The other question of when do you cram all this praying in as well as all the studying you need to do? The rabbis have a lot of discussions about that too, because they realized, we value Torah study, but also you got to eat. And in kemach, in Torah. If you don't have flour, you don't have Torah. In other words, if you don't work to buy food, you can't study. So you need to work. And many of the rabbis we read about had day jobs. They have various kinds that are really interesting ways they inform their Torah learning and teaching. So that's kind of a separate discussion.
Right. So what, mincha would be maybe an hour?
Oh, no. In rabbinical school, 10 minutes, 15, if,
Okay.
15 tops. Depends who's leading. Because there still is a repetition. So the vast majority of the time is like, this is one psalm and this is short and everyone does it silently and these go by quick. So the bulk of the time is taken up by the leader's repetition. So depending on who's leading, 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is practical.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We get it not everyone in rabbinical school always made time for mincha, but I frankly really liked it. I think there's something really great about taking a break from everything else you're doing. To spend even just 15 minutes in prayer. It was also a great low pressure place to learn to lead prayer because there were fewer people there and it was shorter. So I practiced my Amidah repetition here so that I could do it here in front of everybody.
And therefore, Ma'ariv would be also about 15.
I would say in my experience, slightly longer.
Okay.
Again, depends who's leading. As you'll see, Shema and its blessings are relatively expansive, and it's that kind of rather than Amidah, where everyone does it silently, but there's no sort of pacing to it. Everyone just sort of turned loose to daven as fast as they want. Shema has that, where you read everyone does a paragraph silently, and the leader wants to keep everyone together. So they'll sort of look around and see what you're doing, chant the last line, the Chatimah, before we all move on together. So it takes a little bit longer, I would say.
So maybe a half hour.
And still the silent one. Yeah, tops. Yeah, again, depends who's dominating. But also, not long. Not long.
Okay.
Quite short compared to Shaharit, for sure. I mean, Torah, like the practicality of Torah reading takes up a lot of time. One thing I've noticed every high holidays that I've led is I'm like keeping track of the pacing, looking at the clock on the wall, just making sure things are moving along. We get to the Torah service and things slow to a crawl. Because you got to take the Torah out. You got to march it around. You got to get it undressed. You got to get it rolled to the right spot. You got to call the person up. They have to do the blessing. You got to find the spot of the Torah. You got to read the Torah. You got to close it up. They got to bless again. You got to do the same thing again. A bunch of time. It takes forever. Torah reading is for days when you have extra time. And as we'll talk about Torah and why Monday and Thursday specifically. But those are days when there's a little extra time maybe. More questions?
It was just a kind of a practical curiosity.
Yeah. So that's why we're here. Okay, so let's dive into the one thing that I told you was like we understand the outline at this point. But I want to delve into one piece that I told you was had some more to it, which is this right here, the Shema and its blessings of weekday Ma'ariv. And I'm gonna put here with variation. Okay, so to look at this, let's turn in our Siddur to 200. where the Ma'ariv service begins with Kriyat Shema and its brachos. So the Shema and its blessings of weekday Ma'ariv has the same overall thematic construction. You'll recall that it begins with Baruch Hu, and you see that reflected here on 200. That call to prayer that's specifically, it's a call to bless God, and specifically with the blessings of Shema. And then the themes of the blessings are all the same. It's mostly the same in terms of its construction by these kind of sub-rubrics as it is in Shaharit. You get the same kind of narrowing of focus from universal to national to personal, leading into the Amidah, which is kind of the ultimate personal moment. It's just you and God, right? And it's mostly the same construction, like I said. It begins with call to prayer. There's 2 blessings before Shema, and 2 blessings afterwards instead of 1. Why the difference there? It's 2 lines in your source sheet, but there's a line in Mishnah Brachot. It's source 3 on your page. In the morning, one recites 2 blessings before it, meaning Shema, and 1 after it. In the evening, 2 before it and 2 after it, 1 long and 1 short. Now, it doesn't go into detail here about exactly the text of those because it may not have been solidified yet. But, and in fact, almost certainly wasn't. It would have been improvised by the prayer leader on those known themes. But the custom came to be in the morning 2 before, 1 after, in the evening 2 before, 2 after. 1 was long and 1 was short. Okay, so let's see how that plays out here. Begin with Baruch Hu. Also on page 200, we get the first blessing, which in the morning is Yotzer Or, the one who literally the one who creates lights. That's obviously text that's relevant to the morning because here we are in the light of the sun. In the evening, you can see we get here Ma'ariv Aravim. It's a different text for the first bracha before Shema. It's still on the theme of creation. It still involves the heavenly bodies, but instead of praising God as the creator of lights, Yotzer Or, we say Ma'ariv Aravim, which if you were a Hebrew reader at all, I'm on 200. You in the right spot? Yeah. There you go. Ma'ariv Aravim, those 2 words have the same roots. It's, the way it translates here is praised are you, Lord, for each evening's dusk, which is not a very literal translation. It's literally the one who evenings the evening. In other words, who makes evening happen. That's kind of how Hebrew grammar works. The same root also means mixing. You can get if you go to Jerusalem, you can get the mixed grill there, the Me'urav Yerushalmi. That's got all the best parts of the animal, the ones you don't normally eat in all the rest of the dishes. It's literally mixed grill. It's delicious, but you gotta be brave. So it's a word that means mixing, and I think what's reflected here is the mixing of light and darkness, at evening time. Yeah, God mixes in the light and darkness. So again, if you look at the text of that first bracha, it's talking about the heavenly lights and arranging stars in the sky, separating light and dark. It's still on the theme of creation, but a different text specifically relevant to the evening. Is that right? Second blessing, we recall from the morning, was Ahava Rabbah, which means a great love. It's the blessing of the Torah. In other words, praising God for God's gift to the Jewish people in the form of Torah, which is framed as a gift of love. Here we have very similar. It still starts with Ahava, but it's Ahavat Olam, an everlasting love, an eternal love, something like that. Exactly the same concepts. Gift of Torah as love for the people of Israel, but a different text, Ahavat Olam. And the same Chatima, Baruch Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. We come to Shema, which is exactly the same Shema. There's no reason that would change. That's a set liturgical unit. That's what we're responsible for reciting morning and evening. So that is as usual. Here we start with the same word, emet, but it's emet ve'emunah, true and trustworthy. Same theme, which is God's redemption, God's redemption of the people of Israel, which is something true and trustworthy and assured to us. It again, slightly different text, winds up in Mincha Mocha, which you know from the morning. Mincha Mocha B'Eli Madonai. That's from again a biblical text. It's just introduced slightly differently, but it's still on the same theme. Ends in the idea of redemption, and it concludes the same way. Ga'al Yisrael, God, the Redeemer of Israel. Okay, here's where it gets a little strange. That's the one, if we were going by the Mishnah, that's the one they would call the long blessing after the Shema. And the next one is the one they would call the short one. A second bracha, I mean, materially, like it's ever so slightly different. This is what they would call the short one. Second bracha after Kriyat Shema, unique to the Ma'ariv service. There's no parallel to it in Shaharit. And it's called Hashkivenu, again, after its first word. And it's a prayer for safety through the night. If you look at the text on 207, help us to lie down in peace, awaken us to life again, spread over us to shelter your peace, guide us with your good counsel, save us because of your mercy. This is like Ma'ariv in a nutshell, right? It's all about we're going to sleep. We don't know what's going to happen. Remember we talked about when we discussed the Birkot HaShachar, how sleep is like 1/60th of death. Now we're on the other side of it. We're about to 1/60th die. So we want some kind of assurance that we're going to wake up at the end of things. And so that's what we're petitioning for. Grant us life and peace now and always. Praise you, Lord, eternal guardian of your people Israel. Okay, so main theme is shelter of peace, connection very much to the mood of evening prayer that we talked about. You would think it would end here because the Mishnah says 2 blessings before, 2 after, 1 long and 1 short. But what do we have is a third blessing. Dun, 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 right? Okay. There's a 5th blessing here, and we have no idea why. Fun, right? So it doesn't jive with the Mishnah. It's inexplicable because it goes against the rabbinic tradition from the Mishnah. But it's also unique to Ashkenazi liturgy. You will not find this in Nusach Sfard or in Nusach Edot HaMizrach, only in Ashkenazi tradition. And we have what they call Baruch Adonai Le'olam, praise is the Lord forever. And if you sort of skim over the text in English here, it's sort of back to like almost Pesukei Zimra themes. You know, sort of look at like imagine making a word cloud out of this. It's like praise, wonder, glory, rejoice. Glory again, wonders, worship, exclaiming, and all these kind of things over and over again. It's like very out of sync with the rest of the mood. It's they don't cite all the biblical verses here, but it's another one of these sort of pastiches of biblical verses pulled from different places to create a new liturgical unit. What seems to be the reason it's here, whereas Hashkivenu was a personal ask for peace and shelter. It was like, please protect me. This is more of a national prayer for protection. Because it talks about the people who saw the wonders that God did, praying that mercy will be, come upon us and gather us and free us from oppression. All the nations you've created will worship and glorify you. This has a much more national character than a personal one. We really have no idea how it got here. It just appeared in ancient Siddurim. It is notably missing on Friday nights. There's no reason this would be different, like Friday night Ma'ariv, which is still not Shabbat. Well, Mincha is not Shabbat. It's in Ma'ariv. It's on Shabbat, but there's no other reason that Ma'ariv would be different for Shabbat. We'll talk about Kabbalat Shabbat, all the warm-up stuff. We'll talk about that next week. But nonetheless, it's absent on Friday. This is just a very mysterious blessing, and none of the books I looked at really had a great suitable explanation for why it's here. Yeah?
it's like not, is this like sort of like mystery because it doesn't exactly jive with the Mishnah? Is that why
Yep.
in the Siddur it has like, in this first blessing, in this second blessing, in this one it just says in this?
Yeah, as
blessing.
opposed to,
It doesn't say.
it doesn't want to say third. Yeah,
It
I think
doesn't
you're right.
connect it to the Shema. It just says, in
I
this
think you're
one,
right.
just do it.
I think you're right. I hadn't noticed that, but yeah, it sort of sidesteps that this is a third blessing. It's just like, here's this extra one. In this bracha, we praise Creator and claim sovereignty, right? Yep, absolutely. Good noticing. Okay. So, and with that takes you all the way to and it's again quite long, takes you all the way on to 208, where you get the Chatz Kaddish before Amidah, and we're back on track. We've completed our survey. We've successfully extrapolated from Shaharit. First, we learned the overall pattern of Shaharit, all the individual sub-rubrics, even the sub-rubrics and all that. We use that as the baseline to extrapolate what we would expect to find in Mincha Mariv and what we actually find. And I think more or less it meets our expectations within reason. And we've completed our survey of weekday liturgy. Well done. Well done. From here on out, everything is exceedingly rare. One of the sort of funny things about learning to lead prayer, especially in a non-Orthodox context, is everybody is most familiar with Shabbat liturgy. People gather the most to daven on Shabbat. However, that's actually the exception rather than the most common case. You can't practice Shabbat liturgy during the week. So if you're learning to lead, you can only practice leading on Shabbat. So, for example, me, like I said, practicing, davening Mincha, I daven the weekday Amidah over and over and over again, and I almost never do it now because this kind of community does gather for weekday Mincha. So, I think that's the other part of the reason why it's important to me to teach this outline is to make sure that folks continue to understand the importance of weekday liturgy and the importance of and meaning and significance of daily prayer. When you could get the impression from what communities actually do, which is daven once a week, that's the regular thing. The reality is this is the regular thing, and Shabbat is the extra special thing. So we'll look next week, again, kind of extrapolating to some extent from what we know is the baseline. Look at what makes Shabbat special, which I think is actually where this is really going to start to pay off, because folks come the most on Shabbat, but don't really have any concept of what they ought to be comparing to. So it kind of just goes on by. They don't really appreciate the specialness. So this is where I think that we're really going to make some hay in terms of making some meaning and effect in our prayer lives. We'll look at Kabbalat Shabbat, which is a really extended and mystical collection of psalms and piyutim that introduce Shabbat Evening Ma'ariv. We'll talk about a few deviations of Shabbat Evening Ma'ariv from the regular norm. We'll also talk about the Torah service relatively briefly. It's mostly the same across the board, but we'll talk about the Torah service, which is really a Shabbat characteristic as well. And I think as long as we have time, touch briefly on Shabbat Musaf as well. We daven 3 times a day, except on Shabbat when we do 4. There's a 4th Amidah, and we'll talk about its significance next week. Any remaining questions? You guys are awesome. Stephanie's working on one?
No, I'm just processing.
Great. Well, I'll go ahead and sign off for the video then. Thank you all very much. We'll see you here next week at the same time.